A continuación queremos invitar a este escenario a uno de los hombres que más conoce y que más ha estudiado el tema de la felicidad en el trabajo. Él es fundador y director de Hapiness Works, también es creador del Happy Planet Index, el índice de felicidad planetario. Plantea la necesidad de gestionar la felicidad y el bienestar de las personas como parte del modelo de negocio de las empresas. Ha asesorado a organizaciones tan diversas como el Movimiento de Desarrollo Mundial, la OCDE, también a Coca-Cola. Fue parte de la lista de los 10 pensadores más originales y de las 7 ideas más poderosas el 2011, un ranking realizado por la revista Forbes. Es considerado un estadístico del alma. Ha sido invitado a exponer en diversos talleres, en diversos escenarios, conferencias, eventos y ante personas y público de todo el mundo. Queremos a continuación dejar con ustedes a Nic Marks, quien además acaba de bajarse del avión para estar junto a nosotros esta mañana en este encuentro tan importante. Bienvenido, Nic.
Good morning, everybody. But it's almost precisely 19 years since I was last in Chile. One of my big mentors in my life is Manfred Max Neef, who many of you will know. And in my 20s and 30s, I worked with Manfred on lots of ways of thinking about quality of life in new ways. And part of my work has been very informed by him over the years. I want to talk to you today about why happiness is a serious business, why it's important to be intelligently happy in our lives and in our organizations. But first of all, let's just remind ourselves what happiness looks like. This is a happy guy who actually happens to be my best friend. He's called Pete. And we can recognize happiness when we see it here. We can see the wrinkles around his eyes, his smile, his teeth showing. You've got 47 muscles in your face which we display our emotions with. Now, we can be sure that if everybody recognizes happiness, then it is a universal human experience across all cultures. And when we have something which is universally human, we can be sure from an evolutionary perspective that it is highly functional. That happiness is not just to add a little bit of icing to a cake, but it is actually really, really important about who we are as human beings. And indeed, all of our emotions are. We understand that something like anger and fear is part of the fight and flight mechanism. That when we feel angry, there has been an injustice or something's gone wrong, and we start to have some energy in which to deter a future violation. Fear is a signal that there is an imminent threat to us, and we should respond to that threat. And there can be different functional responses to that, whether that is freeze and hope that the predator doesn't notice us, or whether it's run away, or whether it's to collectively defend ourselves. And all of these things happen in our workplaces, whether we want to believe it or not. We will have all gone to meetings and we would have frozen. We'd have kept our heads down because we didn't want to sort of stand up and be shot at. If you're in an environment that is run by fear, that is unfriendly, then it obviously pays ourselves to protect ourselves and not stand up and be noticed. And there are lots of other emotions, of course, too. But one of the important things about happiness is that it is about helping us to seize opportunities. So a high-energy emotion like enthusiasm is filling us with energy that we can create and seize an opportunity. We're literally bursting with energy when we're enthusiastic. When we are very interested in something, we're highly focused, and we're committing to a task which might be difficult in the short term, but with medium-term benefits. So it helps us. So interest, enthusiasm, contentment, which is more of a reflective energy, these are all highly functional in our lives. They help us create and seize opportunities. And if there's one big message about the emotions, and the so-called negative ones, the more uncomfortable ones, anger, fear, sadness, are really helping us deal with threats. The positive ones, enthusiasm, interest, joy, contentment, are about creating and seizing opportunities. And in our organizations, we need to deal with threats. It's functional sometimes to be frightened, to be angry at work, or even sad sometimes when an opportunity is lost or something. But if we want to be innovative, creative, then we need to think in those positive emotional spaces. But there's one more thing about happiness which is really, really important. And why is Pete happy in this picture? Well, the reason that Pete is happy... Oh, I've missed a picture. It's not there. There should be me next to Pete there. I don't know what's happened. But one of the things that goes on with happiness is that I know what's happened, is that I was showing a picture of emotions here and talking about them. So this is a picture of different emotions of anger and fear and sadness. It's a very famous piece of psychological research from the 1960s by a guy called Paul Ekman, who took these pictures all around the world and he showed them to everybody and people could recognize them. And just as a point of interest, if any of you saw this movie this summer, Inside Out, then the emotions they displayed in Inside Out are very, very similar to those. And in fact, Paul Ekman was an advisor to Pixar. But emotions are very, very dynamic. And one of the things I was going to say about Pete was that the context that he was in was he was with me. And happiness is very social. And by that I mean, if you walk down the street and you are laughing to yourself, you look slightly crazy. Whereas if you are with somebody else, it is the most natural thing in the world. And what that means is that happiness is a way that we build relationships, that we bridge to other people. And in our workplaces, this is hugely important. That, if we like people, it doesn't have to be a strong positive emotion, we're going to work much better with them. And if we can avoid situations which are very confrontational or whatever, work is going to flow better in that way. So happiness is part of the way that we relate things. Now, emotional experience is very dynamic and contextual. And there's a piece... sorry, I've gone the wrong way. I'm struggling with my clicker here. There's a piece of work that we did when I was at the New Economics Foundation for the UK Government Office of Science. There was a huge project going on in the UK government at that time. And it's part of government called Foresight, which means looking forward. And they were looking forward to what the mental well-being of the population was going to be and how government policy could influence that. It was a very big project. There were over 400 experts involved and 108 different reports. And we wrote 2 of them, one of which I wasn't going to talk about today, the ministers just talked about, which was the 5 ways to well-being of connect, be active, take notice, keep learning, and give. And they were advice to individuals about how they could live a happier life. But the other one that we did was about how can we measure the well-being and the happiness of a population. And this was the model that we came up with. And I'm sorry if this is a little bit difficult to read, but I'll explain it to you. Which is that in the bottom left, it's called personal resources. And really, that is about who we are. Because as individuals, we're going to have a genetic disposition to being happier or not. We're also going to have a whole history of experiences which allows us to be happier in this moment or not happier in this moment. So we're going to bring ourselves to whatever happens. On the other side is about the conditions that we find ourselves, where we are. So in a sense, it's about who we are and where we are. And in any experience, that's what happens. There's a sort of collision between who I am and where I find myself. And it's out of that emerges what we do in that situation, our functioning. How functionally do we respond and act in that situation? So this is, in a sense, what we're doing. So it's who we are, where we are, what we do. But out of that sort of interaction emerges what we experience. Do we have good feelings or bad feelings about what's going on? What is our experience of what's going on? And as you can see, there's these 2 big factors at the bottom. And very traditionally in politics, as we just talked a bit about politics, certainly in Europe, the right tend to place more focus on the individual, and the left tend to make more focus on the context, the situation. Now, we're working in a UK government context where we are not trying to make any left-right divides. In a sense, we're trying to say that there's some truth in both of those elements. It is absolutely true that some people thrive in difficult circumstances, which is a story that the right like to talk about a lot. Individuals coming out of difficult situations. And it's also true that more people sink in bad circumstances, that more people are going to struggle. So the two things are both in there as being truths. And it is also extraordinary how some people can sink in very benign circumstances. That, people bring difficulties to whatever situation they're in. So if we look at the model just like this, although I've drawn it vertically, it's still quite linear. It's saying there's these factors, they do this, and you get this result, which is do people feel good or not. But the point is that actually it's very, very dynamic. That happiness is not only an outcome. We do feel good when things go well. That's indisputable. But it is also part of a dynamic process that when we feel good, things go well. That both of these are true. There are definitely ways that we create our own luck, if you like. We create positive outcomes by our positivity. And of course, the reverse is true. Our negativity can create bad results for us, even in different circumstances. These are both going on. So if we want to model this, we need to think about what I would call the dynamic feedback loops that go on here, which are that, what we feel shapes what we do. That's the pure psychological model. Our emotions shape what we do. We feel something. Our cognition, our intelligence interacts with that feeling. The feeling is like a signal, and then we respond to that signal. So it makes us think differently. We then do something differently. That can be immediate. It can be unconscious. Sometimes the first time we notice that we're angry is we're acting out something. Okay? So it doesn't always have to be conscious. But that is the feedback loop from feelings to functioning. But there's also a feedback loop from feelings to ourselves, in the sense that if something goes well, we just feel a bit better. We feel more confident in our lives. Our shoulders go up. Our body language changes. And conversely, when things go badly, we start to get more protected. We start to hunch up and all sorts of things. And that's going on in a micro way. We happen in the moment. But of course, over our lifetimes, over our childhoods, we're actually going to have different body postures, different attitudes to life, depending on what's happened to us in our lives. So the child that has just negative comments made to them is never going to be a confident adult. There's a lot of undoing to be done there. In our workplaces, if your review systems for people are highly critical, how can you expect them to be confident? We actually need to be working out how do we bring out the best in people. And that will make them feel more confident, and their confidence will come into their functioning and everything. There's also another feedback, which is what we do shapes our environments. That clearly we interact as human beings. So if you have somebody on your team at work who is what I would call a radiator, giving off positive energy, they are going to make a better environment for everybody around them. Unfortunately, conversely, if you have someone on your team that is a right difficult person, they're going to make life much more difficult for everybody around them. So people have an effect on the circumstances around them. And obviously we shape our own circumstances massively, as well as other people's around us. So this model is very dynamic, it's very fluid, and our emotions are part of that. So, going back to Pete again, this is the picture I was going to show about why he's happy, and the fact that our emotions are very contagious. So, in fact, most of us think that we are slightly psychic because we will walk into a room and we will feel something before we know what's going on in that room. You may come to work, maybe you've walked to work, you're feeling good, you walk into a meeting room and just the energy feels tense. And you picked up a tension before you know what's happening in that room. And that's because we're very exquisite creatures at picking up the emotional field. Similarly, if you're very tired at the end of the day, but your partner wants you to go to a party, you're not feeling good, but you go anyway, and the party you go is great fun, you lift your energy immediately to fit that. So we will adapt to the environments around us. In our workplaces, this is happening all of the time, all of the time. We are adjusting our emotional experience to fit with others. So emotions travel around organizations very quickly. But the idea would be to create happy, highly functional teams in your organizations. If your teams are only happy, but they're not performing well, that's not good business, and you're going to go out of business. If you've got high-performing teams that are stressed and unhappy, you're going to lose people. So that's not sustainable either. So my put to you would be that you need to think of these things together. Happiness and performance, think of them together. They are both critical for our organizations and our businesses. Everybody understands that this is not okay. That when people are miserable at work, they're isolated, they're stressed, then we know that they're not going to do good work. Miserable people do miserable work. But what I don't think is well understood is that okay is not okay. That if you've just got okay people working in your organization, you haven't got lots of conflicts, you haven't got lots of fires to put out, the Americans might say, the North Americans might say. But you haven't got people working with passion and enthusiasm either. And so you're going to be missing out on what I would call a happiness dividend in your organization if you just allow okay to be okay. I don't think it is. And I think we need to work hard to try and create great organizations to do great work. So this is the aim about it. Now I want to just talk about a few bits of data. I am a statistician, I am a researcher, although now I do a lot about promoting the whole idea. But I do like to go back to the science about this as well. This is a study actually made by a guy who works for Gallup, Jim Harter. They've got a lot of data, 140,000 people in the sample. And they were looking at 2,000 teams across time. How happy were they at one time and how successful they were in terms of business performance, and how they were 6 to 12 months later. And what he wanted to look at was, is it success driving happiness? This is the, when things go well, we feel good. And it's undeniable that we prefer to be successful than not. So is success predicting future happiness? This is the orthodox model of the world, really, that that if we work hard and we're successful, we will be happy. But they also looked at the correlational pathway the other way. Is actually happiness at time 1 predicting performance at time 2? They found evidence in their models. It's called structural equation modeling. It's relatively complicated stats. It's sort of second-year university. And they did this, and they found evidence of both pathways. But what was exceptionally interesting was that the pathway from happiness to success was over twice as strong as from success to happiness. So happiness is predicting success 6 to 12 months later more strongly than performance is predicting happiness. And that is exceptionally interesting. And we can see other evidence about this if we look at the stock market performance of different companies. As a researcher at the London School of Business, Alex Edmonds, and he looked at, very cleverly, the performance of places that got listed in the Great Place to Work list in the States. Now, this is information that is in the stock market. There's quite a fanfare in Fortune magazine about these places. So what he did was he plotted a graph which was showing the stock market performance of a benchmark against those that are in the Great Place to Work list. And over this period from 98 to 2008, the benchmark did this. But then he plotted the places that were listed in the Great Place to Work list. The game that he sort of created was that the day it's released, you buy that portfolio of stocks, and then the day before the next release, you sell them and you buy a new portfolio of the ones in that list. So it is actually predictive. And this is what his stocks did, his simulated stocks did over that time, which is a 2.7 times return on investment as opposed to a 1.7 times, which is 2 to 4% every year, which I think someone like Warren Buffett would be very proud of. And that is just looking at the cultures of organizations, and not even with, I would suggest, an exceptionally good measure of the cultures, but it is differentiating some of the culture effects going on there. And you get a massively big difference about what's going on. Now, Alex's work, unfortunately, ends in 2008, but there is a company, I don't know whether you've got it here in Chile, called Glassdoor. It is coming to Chile if it's not here already. The idea of it's like TripAdvisor, but it is for your employees, them telling other people how it is to work at your business. And they will grade you 0 to 5 for different categories. It is a fairly brutal thing going on in Glassdoor. But what Glassdoor are doing is obviously trying to find ways to market and sell the information that they have. And one of the graphs they just produced just 3 months ago was the stock market performance of companies that have got good Glassdoor reviews. And that's the top 3 lines, and the general US stock market is the black line. It's not as smart work as Alex's because it's not using such a good benchmark, but it is highly supportive of his hypothesis that the culture of an organization is predicting its share value. So how your employees experience their workplace is going to be coming right through to your bottom line, right through to your shareholder value. And I know that many people that run organizations always say, I can't think about happiness, I have to think about this quarter's stock market performance. Well, here's your answer. You should do happiness because you are concerned about your stock market performance. So I would say that there is evidence that happiness leads to success. And what's exceptionally interesting is that there's also a feedback loop back from success to happiness. So you can open a virtuous cycle in your organization with happiness leading to success, leading to more happiness. This feedback is obviously neutral to whether good or bad things are going. Unhappiness will lead to disaster, which will lead to more unhappiness, which leads to more bad performance, yeah? But these feedback loops exist and are happening all of the time. Now, happiness doesn't only lead to success, it also has a relationship to failures, which is it drives out failures. And typical ones that cost organizations are things like absenteeism. Are people turning up to work on time in a way? And we know that there's a lot lower absenteeism rates for organizations that have happier cultures. There's lots of ways that this works, including purely biophysical ones, which is that people who are happier get sick less. We know the opposite. When we're stressed, we're more likely to get ill. Well, the opposite is also true. If you're generally happy, you're less likely to get ill. They've done experiments exposing people to the common flu virus, and the happier people are less likely to catch it. There are other more social routes towards people's health. There's a lot of work on social medicine, psychosocial health, and it shows that obviously that people who are happier tend to have stronger social networks, which means that they have more people that care about them, which means that when they're sick, there are people to remind them to take care of themselves, to eat well, take their medication, do their exercises or whatever, so they recover much more quickly from sickness, illness, and even accidents, a broken leg or whatever. So absenteeism goes down. Lower staff turnover. You don't leave a job you love. It's fairly obvious, really. If you're in a particular business that really needs to attract talent, then keeping the talent that you have is obviously a huge way of dealing with that. And you have much lower staff turnover. Staff turnover varies massively from industry to industry. One of our clients we work with is a coffee shop chain. Their staff turnover is absolutely huge inside London. And actually not driven by unhappiness, driven by other reasons that people come and go. Slightly driven by happiness. But it is killing them, their absenteeism. Their staff turnover rate. And they are looking at ways about how they can improve it in ways. Outside of London, they have a better rate going on. London is particularly bad. But if you go to Silicon Valley, then everything is about how do we keep our talents. And they tend to compete on pay and benefits. I think they should compete on happier cultures that people find challenging, stretching, and fun to work in. You also get things like fewer accidents. The minister was talking about accidents. But we know that happier cultures have fewer accidents, and she actually talked about some of the pathways. I want to talk about just a very physical pathway around accidents, which is that when we are happier, we have more peripheral vision. We actually see more about what's going on around us. So we notice things earlier. So if you run a restaurant, then if your waiting staff are unhappy, they're going to be less likely to notice a customer waving at them than if they're happier. That's just a bit of bad service in a restaurant. For most of us, we put up with a bit of bad service. But if this is in a hospital and this is your drip machine, then this is critical response time to emergency. This is patient death and life situations. And we know that the death rate on wards where the nursing staff are stressed and unhappy is much higher than those where they are happy and they are well-staffed and other matters. So in industries where accidents are important, you're going to see benefits in this way. You're also going to have things like if someone who operates the machine loves the company they work for, they care about their work, then as soon as a little noise on the machine starts to happen, they're going to pay attention to it. If they don't care about their work, they're going to welcome that noise because the machine is going to go down for an hour or two and they can go and get a cup of tea or something and get off work. So the caring is a really, really important factor there. And that is not to criticize people who don't care about it. It's probably because they're not cared about. If you're not cared about, how can you expect other people to care? And this is one of the critical things around happiness, is to say it creates a different contract between the employee and the employer. If the employer goes, we want you to be highly engaged and more productive, then that just feels like we want to get more out of you for the same money. But if you go, actually, we'd like to make a better job for you that you really enjoy, you're suddenly in a very different dynamic there about where the employee feels cared about for the organization and they're trying to help them. You also get much better customer service. The figure here is 10%. I think it's using something called the Net Promoter Score, though it's not clear from the way that Gallup report this figure. But basically, we all know that we prefer to be served by someone in any service industry, by someone who is a warm, smiling human being, rather than someone that is scowling at us. However good their product is, we'd still like that human connection. In many organizations, your people are your product. You know, it's actually that service is actually what it is. So clearly, your customer is going to feel, you're going to get much higher customer ratings when things are going well. So happiness is a serious business. I just briefly want to talk about how happy Chileans are, but Jose is going to talk about the main survey results. But there is something that comes out every year now called the World Happiness Report. It is the best international comparison we have on happiness. And the last one came out a few weeks ago. And Chile is actually here on the list. Chile is 27th out of nearly 160 countries around the world. And we find that actually quite a few countries across Latin America do very well on the World Happiness Report. So the top three this year were Switzerland, Iceland, and Denmark. But you know, Costa Rica's coming 12th, Mexico 14th, Brazil 16th. They're probably a bit less happy today, aren't they, Brazil? But Chile came 27th, yeah? Argentina's there, Colombia's there. But then look at some of the countries. Look at Greece. Greece has never been as low as this before. All of the economic difficulties in Greece are really, really playing out in the fact that they are much less happy than they were. And clearly Syria, which is a country in total crisis, is scoring very lowly on these things. And in a sense, that should give us confidence that these indicators mean something serious about the experience of people's lives in these countries. Now, one of the things that characterizes Latin America, and my hypothesis would be about why Latin America is happier than we probably would expect from pure economic indicators, is that you can compare yourselves to Eastern and Central Europe. You have very similar levels of GDP per capita. You have very similar levels of life expectancy, which is obviously a good indicator of health. Similar education levels. Very, very different levels of happiness. And that is all to do with social connections. The social connectivity, the social fabric of Latin America is much, much stronger than of Central and Eastern Europe. Family is strong, friendships are strong, society is convivial, you just see the way people interact in this region of the world. You probably, you're from here, so you just take it for granted, but you can go to other parts of the world and you do not meet as many warm human beings as you do in a country like Chile and other Latin American countries. We've just completed with the Chamber and with Hapiness Works a survey of Chile's population, just conducted last month. And we've created questions which actually look at the science behind them. So that dynamic model that I showed you, all of the questions relate to the different domains of this. So we have questions on people's personal resources. How happy are they themselves? How healthy they are? What's their sense of vitality? How confident they are? What's their work-life balance? So these are questions about the individual. We had them about the system, about the job conditions, the job design, the management system, the work environment, and the social value of an organization. Is this organization delivering value outside of just its bottom line? Is it making a benefit to society? People find that very motivating. We look at how people function at work, very strongly based on the science of happiness and well-being, whether people have the ability to express themselves, do they use their strengths, are they creative, do they have a sense of control, a sense of autonomy at work, a sense of progressing their work, are they learning new things, and how are the relationships at work, that critical factor. And then at the top of the diagram, people's positive and negative emotional experiences, their sense of engagement and motivation, and whether they find their work satisfying and worthwhile. So there were 40 questions in the survey, and the idea is to create a holistic view about what's going on at workplaces. So you can start to look at that data. Obviously, it's in Spanish. We can do international comparisons with our work, and if you look at one of the critical questions that we look at to compare things across cultures, it tends to be how satisfied are you with your job? And actually, of all the surveys that we've done at Hapiness Works, Chile has got the highest score for that. Okay? You'll see Mexico does really well and the other Latin American countries. Now, you have to take these international comparisons with, in English we'd say, a pinch of salt. And the reason is that as a large organization like Gallup or something like the European Social Survey, they do a lot of methodologies about how they make international comparisons perfect in their sampling. I'm very, very confident within each country that our sampling is good, but the comparisons between is a whole different science. So this is just roughly indicative that Chile is sort of right there with other countries, but I would not rely on the decimal places here too much statistically. So happiness is a serious business. How can you do it? This becomes, the question really. And here are some inspiring examples that I just want to sort of finish with, which is that Pixar, big company that we've obviously talked about with the film Inside Out, they designed this huge space in the middle of Pixar offices where people could just meet. And they now call it collisions. I don't think they did at the time. But if you allow people to bump into each other, relationships will form, friendships will form, that will make the social cohesion of your organization better. Now, obviously, not everybody can afford to build big, beautiful spaces. But, kitchens and gardens and simple things where people can meet are really, really important. And I always think that people who smoke have a strategic advantage here, because smokers gather together for their little crafty cigarette, and they talk. And I think in our organizations, we should be compassionate to the non-smokers. And we should allow non-smokers to mingle and chat in certain spaces as well as smokers. And that we should allow that to happen. And that should be considered a natural part of work, because it's important that people get along. This is a picture from an organization in the States called Zappos. It's an online shoe company. It's one of the big .com success stories. It grew from nothing to being worth about $2 billion, all driven by customer service. And Tony Hsieh, the CEO, said, you can't have a happy customer if you don't have a happy employee. So these guys and girls answer the telephones, do the emails, normally with someone saying, "Where are my shoes?" They are not given key performance indicators on how quickly they need to get rid of a customer on a phone. They're talking to a customer, talk to them. They're told 2 rules: be yourself, use your judgment. Zappos wins massive awards for its customer service. This organization you may know, Open English, it's an online platform for learning English across Latin America. They started to frame internally that actually they weren't selling English, they were selling life transformation. Because I'm afraid to say, regrettably, my language, English, is slightly dominant in the world, and so it's beneficial to people in Latin America for their careers to learn English. I apologize for the cultural imperialism of that fact. However, it is, and so when they started talking with people about how learning English will help them earn more money for their family or do things like that, they had an increase in sales of between 20 and 30% of sales, as well as people feeling that they're helping their customers and clients more. This is a picture of a guy called Ray Anderson who sadly passed away a couple of years ago, but he inherited a family business that made floorings, hugely environmentally toxic processes that they used. And he had a sort of epiphany moment when he started to realize that he didn't want to pollute the world. He called it theft from our children. That's why he says one day people like me will go to jail. He started to clean up the organization to make environmentally neutral and friendly floorings. He expected that to be a cost to his profits. Instead, he transformed the company into a very dynamic company that sold ecological flooring that everyone loved working for and was more profitable. This is an interesting organization in the Netherlands. It's called Buurtzorg. It's about community nursing. This is Josh de Blok. He was a community nurse, and as he got more and more promoted into management, he liked his job less and less because he got further and further away from what he came into the job to do, which was to care about people. So with his wife about 10 years ago, he set up a community nursing group of 6 of them practicing in one area. They won a contract. Buurtzorg they decided that every team had to be self-organizing. Nurses are already highly educated anyway and highly motivated. And it had a rule that if a group got more than 12 people, they had to split into 2. Could never have a team more than 12. Buurtzorg has grown from no employees to 9,000 over an 8-year period delivering community nursing in the Netherlands. And nurses have voted with their feet. They have the highest rating of job satisfaction, the highest rating of patient satisfaction, and they have lower long-term costs for care. They slightly more in the first 6 months, and then there's less people getting sick again, so the long-term costs are lower. Very interesting organization. So really, just to summarize, I would say that happiness is a serious business, that, you know, we all universally experience happiness and we can recognize it. That, even filmmakers recognize it, that getting a happy, high-performing team is really critical for your organizations, and it has to be the 2 together, happiness and performance. To recognize that okay is not okay, that you're missing out on a huge happiness dividend if you settle for okay. That happiness leads to success, and if you start with happiness, you can open this amazing virtuous cycle in your organization with happiness leading to success, leading to more happiness again. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.